So, well, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. Kate and I'd like to introduce Kate, first of all, who's joined the team this year, and she's been working 2 days a week, helping out in the curatorial department, but particularly working on this kind of project. And she's going to tell you a bit about how we brought the show together in a minute. But anyway, Kate and I will do our very best to entertain you until we're released into the summer party. So you might have had, I suppose, some awareness of this project by this point, and in particular, the story of Miss Tanner is quite a new one in a way for the Holburne. You'll all remember this tile panel, though, in the cafe, which until now has been the only object on display ever in the museum, or certainly in recent history. The records suggest that, you know, one or two things might have been on display in the kind of 1930s, but beyond that, Miss Tanner's story is not one that you would sort of discover on walking into the Holburne. This tile panel was until recently in the cafe, and it comes from Damascus in Syria. It's a 17th century tile panel. And so, yeah, until now, it's the only sort of sign that we've had of Miss Tanner in the building. Just to say that this was the only image that we had of Miss Tanner, actually. This is from the Bristol Evening Post in 1936, so very shortly before she died. And you get this sense of this quite severe woman. And as you know, we used that in our big campaign. The other things that we knew about Miss Tanner were, what you can see on screen now are they're images of the historic registers that we have about the collection. So they're a record of when things came into the collection and how we sort of gather the information. That ideally everything is recorded neatly in this sort of old school handwriting when it comes in. And we actually have multiple registers. As you can see, they've been annotated, like changes have been made. And so it's all a bit chaotic. And Miss Tanner's particular collection was particularly chaotic. And I can honestly tell you that if you'd asked me a year ago, I actually wouldn't have been able to tell you how many items there were in Miss Tanner's collection, because quite a large proportion of them had been separated from their number. So actually it required quite a lot of digging before we could even sort of get an object list for this exhibition. We had Miss Tanner's own labels, which were extremely useful. They tell us in her own handwriting where she got particular items in the collection and you know, when she got them. So it's actually hugely useful in telling us something about the history of these objects. We also had a typescript of a journal that Miss Tanner wrote after her first visit to the Middle East in 1894. She set off in Christmas 1894 and then travelled through Iran and Persia, or Iraq and Persia, which we now know as Iran, and then wrote about it in this journal by road and river. So we're really grateful to Bristol Museum, who actually have a typescript of this journal, for letting us use it and quote from it and basically tell even more of her story than we knew about already. But one of the, and just to give you a sense actually of where she travelled, because you know, the scale of this journey is quite extraordinary. She went on a 7,000-mile journey from Bath, or near Bath. She came back to Bath, that's for sure. But at the time, she was actually living in Bristol. But we went for the nice alliteration. So she set off she travelled first to London, and then travelled to Marseille, and then went on a steamer ship all around the Gulf, the bottom of Africa, then round to Oman. She went then through the Suez Canal, which actually she didn't even comment on in her journal, which is kind of extraordinary, you know, to the modern, you know, mind. But she basically went across the Mediterranean, through the Suez Canal, and then down past, you can see she goes past Yemen, past Oman, and then into the sort of the middle of Iraq. She went up the river Tigris to Baghdad, and then back down the river Tigris before setting off on an extraordinary journey around Persia, or Iran, which took her on this loop overland. She was travelling solo, except for two local guides on horseback, you know, it's a pretty extraordinary journey, you know, whatever way you look at it, really. And I think the fact that the parts of the world that she visited, to some of us, they're still as distant as they must have been to her, you know. And it's, yeah, it's quite a big journey, I think, when you sort of see it. But we've also found some images of Miss Hannah from much earlier in her life, which was a really exciting discovery. So here you can see her on the left as a much younger woman. This photograph was actually taken in 1903 on her third trip to Persia, because one trip wasn't enough. So she went actually in 1894 to 6, and then again in 1897 to 8, and then again in 1903 to 4. And actually, somebody who knew her kind of later in life actually said that she had spent most of the last 20 years abroad. She basically, once she was sort of freed from her familial duties and responsibilities after the death of her father, she literally spent almost 20 years constantly travelling the globe. And we know from her journal, actually, that by the time she'd been to, by the time she went to the Middle East on her first trip, she'd already been to Egypt, all around Europe. You know, she'd been far and wide even by that point. So she really did sort of set off at great speed. But here, again, so here she is with some friends that she was travelling with briefly in, again, this 1903 trip. So again, you get this sense of, you know, lovely tea experience that Miss Hannah had. And she, unfortunately, we don't have her own account of this later journey, but I think it's really evocative in sort of seeing her and actually her face and seeing her as a much younger woman as well. It's somehow nice to see that. You also get the sense of her being, you know, pretty intrepid. Here she is in a tent with a group of gentlemen who are actually involved with the telegraph systems in Persia. So it's worth saying briefly, like, what the British were actually doing in Persia at this point. It was not part of the British Empire, but it was of huge sort of strategic importance at this period, late 19th century, to Britain. So a lot of British diplomats spent a huge amount of energy trying to sort of make inroads, like schmooze people, make friends in this part of the world, because the area that it was actually sort of you know, where Persia is located, where Iran is. Effectively, they wanted to build the telegraph system through it to link the far-flung sides of the British Empire. So they were actually building this great sort of infrastructure project through Persia, effectively to link their own empire in India and into Europe. So there was also a great deal of interest in, you know, the study of Persian culture, and you know, there are a lot of particular figures that we'll kind of hear about in the exhibition as well. Just people like Lord Curzon, who would later go on to be the last Viceroy of India, and Percy Sykes, who's another person that Miss Hannah knew personally, are all kind of associated with, you know, what's probably today quite an outdated sort of imperialist approach, but actually they wanted to study, they wanted to learn, they wanted to also acquire for museums things from this part of the world. So here you can see Miss Hannah, in case you couldn't tell, this one's Miss Hannah with this pretty amazing outfit. I think it's, I was, you know, had to resist the temptation to dress up as her, but you know, just about managed it. Miss Hannah's journey was, as I said, pretty intrepid. If you want to get a sense of where she was staying when she was travelling around Persia, she was staying in caravanserais. So that's a term, you know, you may or may not know, but it's basically a term for a sort of resting house or a lodge sort of place. And when you see these photographs of two different caravanserais, I think you get a sense of like quite how rustic her experience really was. What she would do, she described in her diary, you know, arriving at all the different stopping points, and she would either set up a tent in some places where the caravanserai was really dilapidated, or she spoke favourably of kind of ones where they'd been recently whitewashed, or where she got the best room because she was a European. She really enjoyed that. But, you know, again, you can see the moment that's captured. So again, these are actually from the 1903 trip. That's where all the photographs that I'm showing you come from. And here they're actually laying out telegraph equipment. So you can imagine this absolutely sort of sparse rural desert area that they're sort of putting up telegraph poles. You know, it's really strange to see that in this otherwise completely, you know, often very barren but extremely beautiful landscape. So alongside these photographs, you can see what is actually the biggest object in the collection. This is the tent panel, which was made from a huge piece of printed cotton from Iran. And you'll see that in the exhibition. It's been conserved, so it's sort of looking, you know, cleaner and brighter than it once was, and it's just a really beautiful bit of fabric. But this Hannah also describes sort of how she pin up the different materials to create a sort of shield or privacy for herself in the tent. When I say she did it, what I really mean is her servants did it. But you know, so there's quite a lot of textiles in the collection actually. And here are just two examples. You'll remember the little purse that was in the display at the bottom of the stairs during the Big Give campaign. Here, a piece of embroidery that's, you know, I mean, if you can imagine, all the pattern on this, it's not printed, it's actually, you know, hand embroidered. You know, it's extremely intricate detail. And the type of embroidery that you can see here was very much associated with the town of Kerman. And here you can see some images of the British consulate in Kerman and also one of the bazaars, which Ms. Hannah commented was a really fantastic place to buy textiles. So even if she was buying things that were actually made in other parts of Iran, she really visited like some of the key bazaars, in particular Shiraz, Kerman, Isfahan, were where she sort of bought most things. And then finally Tehran, where she also bought quite a lot, but lamented that she hadn't bought more at the earlier ones. I think everyone knows that feeling from holidays, you never know quite when to buy things. The technique of embroidery here is known as pâté douzy. It's just beautiful when you see it up close, and I think when you see the amazing colours as well of these pieces, you know, I hope you'll really enjoy seeing that. Some other examples of the embroideries in the group. Got these three little purses, and then a little square purse, which I'll show the front and back of. And then quite an unexpected item here at the top there, little embroidered top. I've had to resist the urge to call it a bikini in my later writing, but I did. But, you know, again, these represent sort of particular regional techniques and traditions of Iranian textiles. And it's really exciting to kind of be able to pick out those patterns and actually see, you know, quite this sort of extraordinary range of colour and technique that you can find in Iranian textiles of the late 19th century. I should say actually that most of the things that Miss Hannah bought, we haven't kind of been able to give a really specific date. Most of them, I think, were made in the sort of period running up to about 1895. So kind of 1875 to 1895 is probably when everything was made. But I think a lot of it was like really being made as, you know, as she came up to the bazaar. So it really is, you know, contemporary craft of Iran at that time. Here are just a couple more examples of the different types of embroidery that you see, like really vivid patterns and so on. And then when you see an image like the one on the left, that little embroidered top might not seem so strange, because if you can imagine this young lady in this sort of scene of two lovers might well be wearing something like that underneath her very sort of translucent shirt that were very much in fashion at this period. So what you're actually looking at here is a painting on glass, but it's not just a painting on glass, it's a reverse painting on glass. So that actually means that you have to create the really sort of details and highlights first, and then work backwards to background. So if you can imagine, you know, all the gold details and highlights would have been done at the start, and then gradually the picture builds up in layers from the back. So that's the process used to make this piece. On the back of it, there's actually a note from, there's one bit in Miss Hannah's handwriting which says that it's Shah Abbas and a wife. So Shah Abbas was a ruler of Persia, but much earlier than the time when she was visiting. And it's probably not him, because he was often depicted in a very distinctive way. He had a sort of long, quite twirly moustache, among other things. So this probably isn't him, it's just, you know, lovers in an interior. But I think it does give you this sense of, you know, the richness of pictorial traditions in Iran, and also a lovely image of kind of the clothes that they're wearing and the setting that they're sitting in. You really do see, you know, the extraordinary detail, the richness. It's, I think, quite evocative. I've also shown what I must apologise is a pretty terrible picture. There are some really nice pictures in this talk, interspersed with some really bad snapshots that I took in the store, so you know, you can see them. But this is actually a small, it's about this big, little sort of like a locket for a chain, and it's made of enamel. And again, it's got scenes of kind of a scene of lovers in an interior, and again, the detail is just extraordinary. You can see, you know, the puffy cushions and all the different textiles and fabrics that they're surrounded by. And there's actually, you'll notice a trunk missing, so I challenge you to, you know, design a bit to fill it with. Some of the, again, this is pre-conservation, I should tell you what you're looking at. This is a little jug from a town called Yaz, which Miss Hannah visited on her third visit to I feel like, I don't know, that insect is gonna be a nice feature for the whole of the talk, I think. But anyway, but again, you can see, you know, these lovely images of people sort of wearing, you know, very sort of late Victorian kind of outfits in the desert. The jug itself is made of what was called Yaz marble, but it's actually, you know, it might be actually an alabaster sort of material, but it's known as Yaz marble. And it's renowned for its very sort of rich, kind of orangey, bright colour, which Miss Tanner wrote about in her diary. The tile panel that used to be in the cafe isn't the only bit of ceramic tile from Miss Tanner's collection. And here you can see two different tiles from different parts of Iran. These are actually among the sort of historic things that Miss Tanner collected. So a lot of the things that she was buying, as I said, were being made, you know, they were contemporary things being made at the time that she was visiting. But these actually date from much earlier periods of Iranian history. So the tile is from the 15th century, the one on the left. There's actually two of them in our collection. And it's from a building, which I'll actually show you on the next slide, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But the technique that's used to make it is it's known as cuerda seca technique. So it's basically, you get, it's basically rope that you cover with wax to keep the different colours of your tile from running into each other, so to get distinct colours. So the rope burns away in the kiln, and you're left with these like two distinct colours on the surface. And then you can just about make out that there's actually still some gilding left on the front of this tile. And gives you a sense of the sort of the richness of this decoration. You can imagine this in a setting with just, you know, hundreds and hundreds, I should say thousands of similar types of tiles. The one on the right, sorry, it's turning round, I never know my left and my right anyway at the best of times. But anyway, this one it's a bit harder to read, I think, but when you kind of, if I just talk you through what you're looking at here, it's a moulded decoration. So you've actually got this leaping animal. You just make out, here's its head, and then it's sort of leaping across the tile. And then there's sort of white tendril sort of decoration around the outside, and lots of gold again, though some of it's rubbed off. This is a process called lajwadina, which is from the kind of the Persian for lapis lazuli. So that's that sort of rich blue colour, and then but this tile is actually the earliest thing in the collection by a couple of centuries. It dates from 1275, so that's, you know, a pretty major piece of ceramic there, and it actually comes from a site in northern Iran which had been built on since the earliest periods. It sort of had a specific kind of meaning and importance in the founding of the Zoroastrian religion and beyond. The building that this came from was built, as I said, in 1275 for a ruler called Akaba Khan. It was for a hunting palace, so that might explain the leaping animal. But what's really extraordinary about this is, in the research, we actually found out that this is actually extraordinarily rare. I mean, it's not just rare, but it's like there are 3 of these in the world, kind of rare. It's really extraordinary. And, so although we don't know exactly where Miss Tanner bought them, we know she didn't visit this site. So, but it does open up, I think, a question about, where was this material coming from? And I think just to say a little bit about that, at the time that Miss Tanner was buying her collections from the bazaars, there's no sense that she stole things. And that is, I think, quite an important distinction. She, certainly there were people who were, taking things in a way that we would not think was acceptable today. Although Miss Tanner was buying material, she, as far as we know, she was buying it in good faith. The buildings that we're talking about here had actually been, the tiles had been taken off, actually centuries earlier. And often the decoration was replenished and changed over the centuries anyway. And so I think, it's a bit of a complex, argument really, because, to our modern ears, it sort of all sounds a bit strange that there were people sort of travelling to this part of the world and trying to buy up the art. And I think all I'll say is that a lot of it came from a sort of, yes, imperialist, but a sort of attitude that they were kind of rescuing things that weren't appreciated by the people of that culture. And I think, whether or not that's true, it does mean that a lot of this material does survive in collections like the V&A, collections like ours, and other collections like Bristol Museum, Brilsey, and other museums that have a lot of this material. So it's been really interesting kind of looking into that and unpicking that story. What I will say about the tiles, just one final thing, maybe you'll notice I'm a bit tile obsessive, is that there were, as I said, other people kind of travelling around the Middle East at this time. One particular chap that I wrote in quite a lot about in the publication is a chap called Robert Murdoch Smith, who was employed by the Telegraph sort of company, and was also employed by the V&A to buy Persian art for the V&A. And he bought, hundreds and hundreds of objects for the V&A Museum. And some of those were actually later sold by the V&A, which seems extraordinary. In particular, the metalwork, which means that we have actually a really unusual and rare collection of metalwork in this museum. But there's certainly a sense that people got a bit more vague about where they got things from as time went on. So the fact that we don't know where Miss Tanner got them from exactly, we might be a little bit cautious about that. But the fact that they come from these important buildings, actually can't be denied. And this is just to give you a sense of where these tiles came from. It's a building called Khargir Madrasa in northeastern Iran. And you get the sense here of like the grandeur of this building, but also how it's been denuded from sort of almost top to bottom. And you'll find these tiles in museums across the world, including ours. One of the lovely things about discovering Miss Tanner's collection is actually working out what some of the stories in the objects are that I sort of didn't know about before. So here, this is actually a mirror case. What you can see is the front, the back, and the inside, which has very sort of European Dutch-looking flowers. I think, maybe that's our nod to the Dutch Masterpieces exhibition. But you'll notice there isn't actually a mirror in it. Miss Tanner wrote in her diary that she didn't want to bring mirrors back. She certainly wrote about the difficulties of transporting objects, although again she didn't do it herself personally, but she got agents to send things back. And I think quite a lot of it got a little bit shaken up on the journey home. So she certainly bought the mirrors in London, and we know that specifically for what she did. So I don't know that this ever had a mirror, she might just not have bought one. But lacquer is a material that had great importance in Persia, and actually in the late 19th century all kinds of different things were being made in lacquer, from pen cases, mirror cases, playing cards, as we'll see in a minute. But just to say, the story on here comes from the Shahnameh, which is the sort of book of sort of Persia's history, sort of stories about Persia's history. And it tells the story of Khusrau and Shirin, a sort of tragic love story. I think it's like the Romeo and Juliet of Persia. So what you have on the middle scene is actually King Khusrau sees the sort of future princess, Shirin, bathing. Normally she's shown in a river, but for some reason she looks like she's sort of sitting in a casket on our version. I don't know why that is. But anyway, here she is bathing. The king catches sight of her and falls in love with her. And then, I should have probably done them in the other order, because now I'm having to go backwards. But anyway, here she is in the far left on the horseback. She's now princess, and she sees the stone carver far at the top, and they fall in love. So it's a sort of tragic love triangle, sort of captured on the mirror case here. I mentioned the playing cards. Here we've got one of each suit for the game Asnas, which actually inspired sort of modern poker. You can see the 5 different suits. And what else? I think a big theme that you'll find in the exhibition is about hospitality. And I think that's a huge part of Persian culture, but also Miss Tanner writes extensively about her own experiences of having, really elaborate teas where she would go in and everyone would sit round on cushions for hours drinking. She was always very cutting and rude about the tea, which she found overly sweet. But you'd have tea and sweetmeats and things like halva, which she really, like you might have had before, and other sort of things like baklava sort of equivalents. And also, you would, what else was I going to say? Yes, you'd also have rose water, which is why I'm going to talk about the one on the left. So, again, that was included in the big give display at the beginning, and I remembered what I was going to say. Sorry about that digression. I was going to say that you'd have sweet things, but you'd also have almost like savoury things, like sort of rolled up bits of lettuce that you dip into sort of honey and vinegar mixture, so quite refreshing. You'd also have drinks like sherbet, which is like a sort of drink of fruit and herbs, like quite refreshing for the hot temperatures, and I think it must be greatly restorative. But what you can see on screen are 2 little, they're sort of tiny teacups and saucers of enamel, and then also this rosewater sprinkler. So gave a lot of thought what I was going to call this, actually, because there's a lot of discussion about, what is it, what's it for? It's a really unusual shaped vase, and some, lots of museums sort of take this, they just call it a swan neck vase or something like that. And, I have to say, I've taken the plunge, I've called it a rosewater sprinkler, but some people also call them a container for tears, which is the translation from Persian. The idea being that it captures the tears of a woman whose husband is away, so that when he returns, she can, show her devotion in liters. Which is quite extraordinary. But I think, my own thinking is that that it's actually for sprinkling rosewater on your guests, so you get to be sort of doused with this cooling scent. So maybe we'll have to try that later on at the party. I don't know. So I mentioned the sherbet. We've got 2 carved sherbet spoons, which Miss Tanner actually had ordered ahead. So she, it gives a sense of the writing culture that people had. She wrote ahead, sent messages saying, could people fish out the best examples of local craft before she got there. And these are some of the examples of that she bought. And you can see there a quote from her diary. And she also describes that these were carved from one piece of pear wood, which is what they're made from, using a sort of really quite crude knife. And she actually saw this in action. So when you see the sort of delicacy of the decoration, it's like quite extraordinary. On the theme of hospitality, this is another mirror case, but one that you can see has seen, I have to say, it is quite dark, and the objects themselves are quite dark because they're covered with a sort of shellac varnish, which over the years has aged. And we're going to show some examples of the conservation and how that's changed the way that we see the objects. But with these, you don't want to strip back everything, so you have to kind of accept that they're a little bit darker than they once were. But the brown sort of tones actually would have been there originally as well. They wouldn't have been, once these bright things that are now sort of not white. So not quite the same as, our Bruegel, where you take off the varnish and everything kind of comes back to life. It's a bit of a sort of different process for these kind of objects. But what you can see here are lovely scenes of people in the interior enjoying what I described, those teas. Here, sort of an elaborate setup of glasses and bottles. This is probably a Chinese porcelain bowl full of sherbet. And then here you've got an acrobat doing a backflip. Again, it's quite hard to see, but you can see it better on the object, I promise. So when it's in the gallery, you'll be able to see it better. The other piece of pearwood that Miss Tanner got was this pearwood box, which again has one of her object labels inside, and she describes again getting that in Baghdad, this town in sort of the south of Persia, and watching the craft actually being done by different makers there. And this is a kind of interesting example of how sometimes what she said about things were a little bit confusing and a little bit contradictory. Because she says that the carving is actually taken from the bas-relief of Persepolis. So there's nothing at Persepolis that actually has this motif. So whether somebody told her, yeah, okay, this is from Persepolis, because it does seem like that was a bit of a stock response from all the craftspeople, because there are lots of references to Persepolis. But actually, there are huge scale carvings from that ancient city, which Miss Tanner did actually see. And there are particular motifs that you see again and again in Iranian art of two animals sort of locked in a deadly battle. The idea that it's a sort of battle between good and evil, between, neither one of them is winning. It's a constant sort of struggle. And so what you can see on the top there is a sort of dragon-like creature fighting a lion. Whereas at Persepolis, it's a bit different. There's it's not a dragon, so sort of almost Persepolis. This is another one that actually takes some imagery from Persepolis, but mixes it with other imagery. So it actually is a mirror frame, and again, she does helpfully describe on the back that she bought it in Shiraz, and that she bought the mirror itself in London when she got back. So she just bought, literally the sills around the edge. That's what she bought. But you can see the amazing detail of this decoration here. Wonderful scenes that are from, as I said, Persepolis, and also another site called Natural Rustam. But also there's a lot of imagination in there too. It's all kind of joined together in these scenes. And actually, you can see when we cleaned this, revealed an inscription which actually says its maker is Mahmud Shirazi, year 1313, so that's 1895. So she must have been basically trotting into Shiraz as this was being, made by Mahmud from Shiraz. So this is another object that I think gives you a sense of how much these things have changed over time. You often hear us talking about how, textiles in particular, they faded so much. And here's a fantastic example of that. This is a piece of embroidery, which again, this slide just does not do justice to it. When you see it in the space, you'll kind of actually recognize this individual stitches, really, really intricate stuff. And it's actually, it's called a trouser panel. That might sound weird, like how is this trousers? But what I want to just point out here is the vivid colours that you can see on the back of this. So effectively, the front has faded because it's been exposed to sunlight, but the back, which has been covered, still has the original colours. So if you can imagine, it once would have had the brightness of that sort of corner area all over. So the way this technique was done was actually by sewing sort of diagonal lines and then basically filling them in bit by bit with floral decoration. So it's a really intricate technique. And there's another piece in the collection which actually uses that same technique, but here the trouser panel's been turned into a needlework box, which Miss Tanner says she bought in central Persia. She obviously couldn't remember where she got it exactly when she was writing the labels a few years later. So this image, I think, gives you a sense of how it was trouser panelled. So you take a view and they become the legs. So you'd sew together, like almost like a patchwork, these rectangular sort of squares. Sorry, rectangular squares. You can tell I've had a day of installing, can't you? And they become shells. And there are actually stories of sort of men going home and actually unpicking their wives' outfits because these panels were so popular that they were like, quick, let's go and sell them at the bazaar. So, but here you can see a bit more close up how bright those colours really are. So that's the back of that same piece. And also, you know, another sort of challenge that we've had is that you may detect, you know, from everything you've heard me say before, unfortunately I'm not an Arabic speaker or a Persian speaker, so had some amazing help with translating things, but actually there are parts that people couldn't even understand what language they were in, that people really just couldn't translate. So it's an ongoing process. So if you do, you know, see things and they're wrong, then, you know, do tell me. This is a piece of embroidery. Again, this is a before photo, and here after. And I think it gives you a sense of how much difference, you know, even just cleaning these objects makes. So that's actually, in terms of what's happened conservation-wise for a lot of these objects, it's cleaning, because they had just years of ingrained dirt or had just discoloured over time. Here actually you've got some work in progress, so you can see how this is actually in the conservation studio. They're washing this fabric, you know, hugely delicate. Here, this is where it's drying, and you can see like pins holding it all in place as it dries. But again, just such intricate sort of knot work again on this very sort of fine muslin shawl. Here's the first of our birds, and I think quite a nice before and after. Gives you a sense of the damage that was done to a lot of these objects by being stored in, you know, less than ideal conditions in the 20th century at the museum. So this is a hawk on a stand, so before and after conservation. And again, I think when you see these objects sort of not on a screen, you'll really sort of start to see those transformations, because not just, you know, the rust is sort of gone. I mean, honestly, when this little hawk went to conservation, you could kind of vaguely tell that there was gold underneath, but you had no idea whether any of it was going to survive, because it was just so badly corroded and rusted all over the surface. And yet they're able to remove that rust and reveal this extraordinary detail all over the surface of the piece, and even all over the stand, which I had no idea that there was anything on there, but cleaning it revealed that actually there's inlaid gold and silver all over the stand as well. So a lot of nice surprises, I have to say. And here's a bit more of a close-up of the hawk. So the birds, actually, this and the peacock, which I'll show you in a minute, they were both used for parts. They were basically parts of. Really loud. They were parts of standards that were carried in the Persian New Year celebration. So again, we kind of find out more and more about parts of these collections, what they're actually used for, but they are really lovely decorative objects as well. This is another before. This is a brass vase, and after. Quite a transformation. And here, I've got before and after together. I'm not doing a big reveal each time, I'm just keeping you on your toes. You know, you can barely see what it's made of before. I mean, I know it's not a wonderful photo, but I mean, you know, it was just black all over. And then, and after, you've got this amazing decoration suddenly revealed. There weren't that many things in the collection that were actually broken, but this water bottle was one of them. And the story of that has actually been quite funny, because it was described as being slate, but it's not slate. It's from a town called Mashhad, and it's a type of soapstone. And so this is actually a water bottle, and you can see the base was broken in through. And this was another of these sort of slightly weird kind of journeys of discovery, should we say, during this project, because I didn't actually know where those bits were. And then there's a box which Matthew, who I'm sure many of you remember, had when we did the project, he'd actually gathered any sort of chunk of some bit of pottery or anything into a box, anything you couldn't match up, and so there's a bits box. And I just had a hunch. I was thinking, well, shall I just see if there's anything that looks like this in the bits box? And there they were. And the same with the lid. It was in a kind of miscellaneous lids pile. And so here, the peacock. I know that we've sent around some stuff in the volunteers newsletter and things. So you can see how transformed he is by that conservation treatment. I think we also learned a great deal about how the technique of actually making him sort of occurred. So I had thought, actually, because you could just see gold like under the surface, on the display, you could tell there was something going on under there. What I didn't realise is that it's gold and silver. So both metals are used to create these sort of contrasting patterns. And the process is actually onto the surface of the steel, you kind of cut into it, creating patterns, and then use very fine gold and silver wire, hammer it into the sort of lines of the pattern that you've created, and then polish it with an agate stone. And that's how you get this very sort of flat, smooth surface, but with the gold inlaid into it. So the one thing to say about him, and the one thing I'm still hoping I'll find one day in a sort of bit box or wherever, is his tail. Because seen other examples where, it's a fan tail sort of made of sort of filigree or metal, and it's just a shame that we haven't been able to find that. I think, I have to say, given the condition of the rest of the peacock, it would have been really delicate, and I'd be amazed if it had survived, to be honest, because it would have been very, it would have been cut work, so it would have actually been quite fragile. So I think, I hope I'll be proved wrong. So I'm going to hand over to Kate, because she's going to tell you a little bit about the actual exhibition, what it's going to look like, what it's going to feel like. So I'm going to just on the slide. Yeah. I was going to disappear seamlessly around there, but it didn't quite.
Okay, so obviously the exhibition doesn't start officially till Thursday, so we can't take you upstairs at the moment. There's not much to see. There's some very beautiful painted walls and some empty display cases. But I thought I'd just talk a little bit about what we're planning, how we've kind of come to this to make these decisions. So this is going to be the exterior wall at the top of the stairs. So you might have seen me, if you work Mondays or Tuesdays, you might have seen me walking around looking very confused with a tape measure and some masking tape. But I can now confirm it all fits, it's all fine. So when you get to the top of the stairs, you'll be greeted by this. The tile panel from the cafe will be there, along with one of the copper trays. And the amazing brass vases that we just showed you earlier. And we've tried to incorporate just elements of the journey in this very simple map, but I think it kind of gives you an idea of the scope of her journey. It's quite an amazing thing to see, really. So that will be it from the outside. I'm not a very computer literate, so this is my very basic kind of plan. So this is obviously where you come into the exhibition space, and Chris's office is just through here. So it is a small space. This is one of the challenges of fitting about 75 objects into this exhibition. So it's taken a little bit of planning, but we've got it. It's all fine. In this corner, you've got some of the kind of larger pieces of textiles, including the tent panel, and those kind of really richly embroidered shawls and table covers as well. So when you go into the exhibition space, the first case, the theme is kind of the key objects that explore Miss Tanner's story and kind of the history of Persia. So that's this one on the left there. So that includes some of the tiles, the silver mirror frame, the birds, and some of the textile samples as well. And then the second wall, the case there kind of explores the themes of personal accessories and interiors, because we've got this really rich collection of textiles. We really wanted to kind of celebrate that. I also thought, it's kind of interesting to see the kind of process that we undertake in planning displays like this. When I started in January, the majority of the collection wasn't even here. So a lot of it I'd never even seen before. So I was kind of working from measurements that were in archive material from almost 100 years ago. So I was kind of relying on that for a lot of it. But as it did all return, and it all looked incredible and really rejuvenated and kind of vivid and evocative, we spent some time just making sure that what I'd planned would actually work, and kind of thinking about how it could all be grouped together, thematically, and how we interpret that. So the third theme is hospitality, which Catrin mentioned earlier. That's a really kind of crucial part of Persian culture. So you can see here again when we were planning these, there was still a couple of bits that were out being conserved. So there's a couple of gaps, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what to expect. And the final display case kind of explores the idea of trade and the transfer of design ideas, because the majority, basically everything from the collection Miss Tanner purchased, in Persia, it would be easy to assume that that's where it all came from, but we actually have examples of Chinese porcelain and pottery as well, and that kind of is a good way to explore how changing trade affected kind of fashions and stuff. So as Chinese porcelain became less fashionable here, a lot of it began being exported to the Middle East. So she's kind of picked up examples of that kind of work there as well. So we wanted to incorporate that and kind of really show the scope of her collecting habits. And I think it really gives you an idea of, like any of us when we go away, kind of picking up the things that you find interesting and you can relate to. So I think that kind of comes across really nicely in her collection.
So if you might have seen Kate running around with tape measures, you might have seen me sort of either not here or running around with proofs. That's because a lot of work's gone into producing a publication, and actually this is one of the really nice sort of added bonuses of the Big Give campaign, is that we weren't in a position to do a publication for this, but actually we felt that it was really important to kind of tell that story and really reflect the transformation that the collection's undergone, and also share some of the new research that's come out of the project. So you're looking at the cover, the proof cover of the book, which, if all goes to plan, will be in our shops from Wednesday. But you can see again, really tried to sort of celebrate with the new, beautiful new photography. That was also something that the fundraising kind of has enabled us to do, to sort of record and share that information more widely. We've also got a program of events around the exhibition. These are just sort of snapshots from the What's On. So I'll be doing a lecture actually in 12th of September. I'll be doing a lecture, but that's actually going to be sort of more less focused on the exhibition, but more about specific stories about some of the objects. So sort of not identical to today, but actually telling a bit more of that story. And then there's going to be a film screening introduced by Kay of Letters from Baghdad, the story of Gertrude Bell, who's perhaps, if we're calling Miss Hannah probably the second Western woman to travel solo around the Middle East, Gertrude Bell's the first. So that's a really interesting documentary about her. And then there's also an evening lecture by a real live explorer, Jackie Hill Murphy, who's going to be doing a lecture about female explorers. But I will say that this is the sort of public program, but we've actually also got a lot of other events which are something that I really felt was important for this project, was to actually use it as a way of engaging different audiences with, but both the Holburne's sort of untold stories and also the arts of the Middle East. So we're doing kind of quite a lot of other activities with the learning team and around talking to refugee families. We're doing loads of different workshops with schools and that kind of thing as well. So there's a lot of other things going on behind the scenes as well. And also just one other thing which is kind of off What's On, but it's still going to happen, is at a future update, we haven't exactly decided which one it's going to be. I'm really interested to hear from people who've been to the Middle East, we're going to do a sort of mini salon where people can come and share their memories and stories of travelling to the parts of the world that Miss Hannah went to. So I'll make sure that we include information about that in the volunteers newsletter for anyone who'd like to come and either tell their story or hear people's stories about that. So we've also been going crazy on social media in the run-up to the exhibition. Those of you who are on Instagram, Facebook or Twitter might have seen some of our posts. So Kate's been busy behind the scenes sort of putting all that content together and really trying to share that. So we're really excited that we've been doing a post a day up to for the last month in the run-up to the exhibition, and we're going to really keep trying to share the content that we have about Miss Hannah and her story on that. So you can, you know, do the old following of everyone if you're into that. But also, I've been tweeting quite a lot of stuff as well, like not as the museum. So if you want to see that, you can follow me too. That's it. I think I just before I finish, I do just want to say a massive thank you though to sort of everybody who's made this possible, because I know that you know, for the team here, it's been, you know, quite a hectic few months. I have to say that it really honestly has been quite a feat to get this together for the exhibition opening, because you know, originally we thought we were going to conserve 24 objects, and we actually conserved 61 objects. So it's amazing, you know, what we've been able to do and what the fundraising and the success of that has enabled us to do. But it's, you know, it's also been that there have been hairy moments, you know, just even making sure that you know, we got the things to the conservators and all of that. It's been a bit of a logistical juggling act, even more than usual. But you know, we couldn't have done any of it without your support for, you know, the project when we were doing the Big Give fundraising and all of that. So it's just you know, to say thank you for that, and I really hope that you enjoy the story. And also, if because we're really trying to like share that story, if there are things that you want us to talk more about, or you know, things that you want to hear about, like please do tell me, because you know, there's lots to tell. So I'm really excited to do that. And just one final thing is that we're also we've got translations of some of the inscriptions in the like, you know, that we can share with you, and where possible we've, you know, included that in the label text, but we haven't got a huge amount of space to talk at length about all the objects. So we are putting together a kind of guide to what the different inscriptions are when we've got translations and things like that. So watch this space for that as well, just to let you know that that's coming. It's not there immediately. So thanks.